Hey, this is Mark with Anatomy of Tone. In this video, I'm going to discuss an article I wrote years ago about the classic Rickenbacker 12-string sound. I originally wrote this article because I was very unhappy with the sound of my Rickenbacker 360. I had bought, I think it was a year 2000, 2001 Rickenbacker 360. I bought it from a musician's friend at the time. I had to buy it through a catalog because they just weren't that available. I was living in Pennsylvania at the time before I moved to New York City, and a lot of places didn't even have the model I wanted in stock. So I never really got to try one and compare them. So I ordered it, it came, and it's a beautiful looking guitar. The finishes and the colors on Rickenbacker guitars are just pretty exceptional. But one thing I noticed that it just didn't sound fabulous. I don't know, it just didn't have that Beatles sound or that Tom Petty sound. And that was, I think, the reference that I was using a lot for the Rickenbacker 12-string sound. I wanted a Hard Day's Night. I wanted Help, right? Those are the sounds I wanted. But it sounded a lot more dull and just didn't have life to it. And I just couldn't understand why that was, right? And for years, I thought it was just the amps I was using, although I was using Roland Jazz Chorus, twin reverbs, a variety of amps that were actually pretty bright, and I still didn't get that twang out of it. I didn't have a Vox, so I thought, okay, it's just I don't have a Vox amp, and that's the missing ingredient. Well, fast forward, moved to New York City, start doing a lot of sessions, it's still not sounding great. I got to try it with some Vox amps and eventually bought my own Vox, and it still was not just sounding amazing. So I couldn't really wrap my head around it, and I was just at a point where I was almost ready to just sell the guitar and just say, okay, this is just not working, right? I paused for a second because I remember I had this experience with my Les Paul that was a 1990 Les Paul that came with some pretty bad pickups in it, and the pots were wrong for the guitar. There were some errors in the wiring of that guitar, and it made me think, well, maybe I could swap out the pickups for the Rickenbacker and get a better sound. So I contacted Rob at Gemini Pickups, and I talked to him about building a new set of Toaster pickups. The Toaster is a specific style of pickups that were made for the original Rickenbacker 12-string guitars. Nowadays, they come with these high-gain pickups, and they do not sound anything like the original Toaster pickups. You don't have that sparkle, you don't have as much dynamics. It kind of sounds like there's a blanket over your guitar tone, and it feels like there's a plastic or something in between your fingers or your pick and the guitar speaker. And one thing I really am particular about with hand-wired pickups, if they're done right, is it really feels like your fingers or your pick just touch the speaker. Like it feels like it's that clear of a path from the expression of your note to the speaker. So I had this experience with the Gibson. I had new pickups hand wound for that, and new pots put in that were at the correct values, and it made all the difference. So I decided to try that with Rob and see what he would do. Now I've been hearing amazing things about his pickups by this time because my friend Farhad from FSC Guitars was working with him with some pickups, and it just came really high rated. So Rob built these Toaster pickups from the ground up. He had to source the casings and, of course, the magnets and all that stuff. And he made them. He sent them to me. I put them in, which I'll talk about in a second. And of course, I made some recordings of the originals before I swapped them out. The difference was night and day. It was wild because all of a sudden, like, the touch sensitivity was there. It felt like the blanket was taken off the guitar. Now, the Toaster pickups are lower output. Lower output guitars tend to have a little more clarity to them and not be as cloudy. These are just wonderful pickups. So the Geminis were just magical in the guitar. So I didn't have to sell the guitar. It wasn't really the guitar's problem at this point. It, in fact, was the electronics. I also went through and replaced all the wiring and the caps. Now, let's just talk about this for a second because the pickups were super important for the guitar, but it was one part of, I would say, the process of getting this classic 1964 George Harrison sound, and that is making sure that the pots are the right value, It does matter, and some of the modern Ricks aren't necessarily matching the pot values from the original. So I worked with Matt Brewster at 30th Street Guitars to help figure out exactly what the value should be for the pots. I'm going to share a diagram in a second, and you're going to see it, and it'll let you know all the values, but also the caps. Now, there's a very important cap that needs to be added into the Rickenbacker 12-string to get it to sound like that George Harrison vibe from '64, right? And they call it a green chiclet cap. It's a .0047 cap. It's this tiny little, they call it chiclet because it looks like they used to have this gum called chiclets. And they were these little tiny pieces of, like little square pieces of gum that you would eat. And it's the size of basically like a chiclet. It's small. What it acts as is pretty much a high-pass filter. So it starts filtering out low frequencies so that you get a little bit more of a focused, brighter sound. And this is the sound we're hearing on those Beatles records like Hard Day's Night and Help. It's not like a full range sound. We actually have that .0047 cap in, and it's acting as a filter. It gives us that chime that you really can't get any other way. I talked to Matt about this. I found the caps. It was really hard, by the way, to get all this research. It was not easily available. Rickenbacker is tight-lipped about it. I reached out to them and wanted to ask them some questions about it because I was going to promote their company. They just would never respond to me. I had to do a lot of digging from a lot of resources online, and there are some really good websites that are specific about Rickenbacker guitars that I was able to source some information from, and just talking to people like Matt Brewster from 30th Street, who is an expert on guitar electronics. He brought up an interesting concept. He suggested that I put a push-pull pot on the lead tone knob in order to put the .0047 cap in or out. So I could either have the green chiclet high pass sound, or I could have more of a full range sound, which would be more like the Who or what some other bands were doing later on in the '60s, because they only actually put that .0047 chiclet in for a short period of time. I think it was only the year 1964, and they stopped doing it. But it's amazing because even within that year, like some really important recordings were made that include that cap and obviously the Beatles material. I took Matt's suggestion, and when he wired my guitar, I asked him to put the push-pull pot switch in. Now, he got this idea because of the Rickenbacker. Was it the 4003? I can't remember which model Rickenbacker bass it is, but this actually is an option on some of those basses where you can use the push-pull pot to basically bring in or out the high-pass filter, because sometimes you were able to do that with the bass just to get a nice thin, kind of punchy, gnarly bass sound. You could use that push-pull pot, and of course it would be just the full-range Rick sound. It's turned out to be a really wonderful addition to the guitar because it's a specialized sound when we think of that early Beatles vibe. So there's times I want it, and there's times I need more of a full-range 12-string sound. So in this case, having both as an option is really a wonderful feature in today's recording world. A couple more things about the electronics. I'd swapped out all the caps. In fact, I swapped out all the electronics in the inside. I used really good, high-quality CTS pots and the caps. So the caps are important. I did mention that the .0047 chiclet cap. I did post a link on my blog, so if you go to my webpage, anatomyoftone.com, you can search for my Rickenbacker article, and in there it'll give you all the correct values for all the pots and the caps and everything. So these you can source. They're pretty cheap. You could buy them in bulk, or if you really can't find one, I do have a small supply. Let me know. Maybe we could work something out where I could send you one. I have less than 100 of them, so it depends on how many people reach out to me, how many I could supply. But if you're having a hard time finding them, I have more than I need right now because I bought them in bulk. But they're a little easier to find than the other caps that I put in. So you need two .047 caps. These are caps similar to what you'd find in like a Stratocaster or something. And I get very picky about caps. I think that they sound different. I'm one of those people. I know some people can't hear it, and I don't deny that they can't hear it. I think everybody's hearing is just a little different. Everybody has different ranges that they could hear. So I just happen to hear a lot of different frequency ranges, and my ears are sensitive to that. I did a blind test the one time when I was trying out some different caps. In fact, for a Les Paul, we set them up so that you can just use a switch between them very easily, and I would switch between them without looking as I was playing, and there's a friend would switch between them for me, and it kept going back to the same caps, and I kept having the same description for the caps that were being selected, and I heard the difference. So to me, it was clear as day, and I kept going back to this one cap that was my favorite. That cap happened to be a new old stock Russian cap, which was given to me from somebody whose job was sourcing new old stock caps. So he gave me a few, and I was very fortunate about that because I've used them in a couple of guitars, including my Strats and my Rickenbackers and stuff. So sourcing new old stock caps is definitely an option. You just have to make sure that you get a .047 at a 50 volt or above. Now, the thing about the voltage is anything above 50 volts is going to be fine for a passive guitar pickup. The more volts it takes, the bigger the cap is going to be. So a 500 or 600 volt cap is going to be much bigger than a 50 volt cap. You just have to consider this when you have to think of the size of the cavity that your capacitor has to fit into. The Rickenbacker cavity is pretty busy because there's a lot going on. If you have the Rico sound set up, and of course with there's a lot. There's the mix knob. There's a lot going on. So I would say try not to buy the biggest cap. It's up to you if you want to try paper and oil. I will say some of the caps that are very popular that I didn't like are the orange drops. Orange drops, they're too sharp of an attack to me, and they seem kind of bright. I didn't like them. I didn't like them in any guitar I've had, so I've always taken them out and used older, new old stock, or just something that doesn't have that same attack and brightness to it. You may find yourself in a position where you just have to try some caps until you find some that you like. There are these Mojo Tone .047 caps that are at 50 volt. You can go to mojotone.com. They make really good products, and I bet you that they're good caps. I haven't tried those, so I can't say. But you're still going to have to just get a few and try because everybody's taste is different, and you have to see if you notice a difference, first of all, because it may not matter to you or you may not notice the difference. But if you do notice the difference, it's definitely worth trying to find a cap that you like, and then of course you could use it in multiple guitars that take the same capacitance, right? I will say, stay away from the ceramic caps, those really cheap little brown caps. That's what actually came in my Gibson stock from 1990. It was just I don't know, that's shameful to be putting those caps in such an expensive guitar. And the wood was so nice, and it is so nice on my 1990 Les Paul, but there were just the electronics and what they were doing at that time was just not really cool. Like I said, I swapped everything out in it, but those caps, I was really surprised about the ceramic caps being in the Gibsons. So now I have really nice caps in my Gibsons. But spend some time, find out what you like. So for the Rickenbacker 360 sound, to really get that authentic 1964 sound, you need the Gemini Pickups. Now, the Gemini Pickups, the toasters, he doesn't officially offer them on his website anymore because Rickenbacker, instead of maybe having a conversation about it with me and maybe just making better pickups instead of putting those stupid high gain pickups in their guitars, they don't communicate. They just do what they want to do. And they sent Rob a cease and desist order because it was more important to stop Rob from making them than if they were just doing it right in the first place. So there you go, big company business, right, which is unfortunate. And it turns out, I think, Rob was getting a lot of business from them because it wasn't just me that was having this problem. When I made the article in the first place, before people really started figuring it out, you know, I didn't know if that many people were dissatisfied with it. I just knew that I was dissatisfied with it, so I wanted to find a solution. And then it turns out my blog was getting lots of hits, and then Rob was getting a lot of orders for these pickups. And then, of course, Rickenbacker brought the hammer down, the legal hammer down, which, you know, if they were just making them right, they wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Even though Rob doesn't have them listed on his website anymore, just reach out and have a talk with him. He can't legally post that he makes them, and I won't say that he makes them, But if you reach out and just talk to them and have a conversation about Rickenbacker pickups, if you know what I mean. So you need the Gemini Toaster pickups. Rob's pickups are my favorite pickups being made right now, period. I put his Mercury 1 pickups in my SG. He rebuilt the lipstick pickups in my Dan Electro. He's just making, in my opinion, the best pickups, and they're fairly priced too for how magical they are. I see pickups that are going for 3 times what he's charging, and I honestly feel like his are better. They're pretty amazing. So the toasters are definitely an irreplaceable part of the recipe for that classic Rickenbacker sound. Then we have to get into the wiring. We have to make sure that we have the right pots, right? Some of the pots are going to be 25K, some are going to be 50. So then we have to make sure that we're using the right caps, that we have the .0047 green chiclet, and then we have the .047 capacitor that's 50 volts or above. And then you got to get somebody to wire it. And I recommend using the push-pull pot unless maybe you're only in a Beatles tribute band and you don't need to switch sounds. But otherwise, the push-pull pot is a pretty wonderful feature. Now, my blog, you will see that I've listed a diagram of the wiring, and I do have a list of the parts, and I have some pictures of it, and you could go check it out. And there's some pictures on my blog too of a guitar that Rickenbacker actually refurbished. I had a friend who sent a Rickenbacker reissue, a 64 reissue, back to Rickenbacker to get to period correct spec. And they sent it back, and it was curious to me because it wasn't. And so the green chiclet cap was not in it, and they used orange drop caps for the .047 positions, and that's not what was used in the originals. So it just kind of surprised me that even when you send it to the Rickenbacker factory, you expect they're going to give you the bona fide Rickenbacker sound, but they didn't, you know. And so it's best to just source these parts and use your tech to be able to install them. If you don't know how to install them, there is an option to send your guitar into 30th Street Guitars in New York City. They have received numerous guitars to do this exact procedure. That was another thing that surprised me when I talked to Matt, is that, yeah, there were a lot of people contacting him from all over the country and saying, could we send our Rickenbacker to you so you can do the mods and set up the pickups and everything? And it works out well because Matt really knows what he's doing. But if you have a competent tech near you and they could read the wiring diagram, then they should be able to do this for you. It just seems unfortunate that we have to go through this amount of work in order to get this classic vintage Rickenbacker sound, but we do, at least for the stock Rickenbacker, so mine's not a reissue. And I don't believe that even in most of the reissues that they're actually wiring them with the green chiclet, and they definitely don't do the push-pull pot option. So even if you're getting a reissue, it's not necessarily going to be a snapshot of the tone exactly from that 1964 sound. I'm going to place a link to my blog on the Gemini Toaster pickups and the Rickenbacker mod in the description of this video, so you can go and read up more on the details. And on my website, I have a lot of examples. I feel like it'll be better for you to go to the website and listen to the examples and me putting them in the video, because you'll be able to play them back and forth. But it's pretty much night and day between the high gain pickups and the toaster pickups. And I'm just curious, in a lot of ways, what made the high gain pickups attractive to Rickenbacker to put in when so much of their business is based around the tone of the Beatles and the Byrds and Tom Petty, which are all pretty classic Rickenbacker sounds. I'm confused why a company would make a decision to not deliver that sound when I would imagine the majority of people that are buying them are buying them for that sound. So who knows, but that's where we are. I would say that outside of the electronics, the Rickenbacker pickups with the hardware and just the finishes and everything on it are beautiful, and they're made really, really well, and they sound great. And I've had mine for over 20 years now, and it's a very reliable guitar. It just was the electronics that was quite a disappointment. If you're liking this video, please hit subscribe, share the video, leave some comments. I'd like to know your experience with the Rickenbacker guitars, and if you actually like the high gain pickups, let me know if you like them and how you're using them. Until next time.